What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Cast a Podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and the iTunes App Store, and if you're watching on YouTube, welcome into the channel. Ronnie Moore here with my man Kyle, Jessie. We're going to break down the Elite Series event at the Sabine River. We're going to talk about something a little new in this episode as well called Mercury Drain the Lake. I know a lot of people tune in for fantasy fishing wise and Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. That is still a thing, but now we have added another game to the platform so that you can have two games for the price of one, which was free. So we're excited to bring that to you. So Kyle, welcome in. I appreciate you joining me again. I love doing this weekly now with you. Basically, we got to do one for a week for recapping the event and one for the next week previewing the event. And I'm excited to talk about the Sabine. What a crazy week of long runs, low weights, stingy fishery, and just a lot of drama unfolding at the Sabine.
No doubt. I think most people would look at a tournament like that just purely based on the results, the weights, and would think, man, that tournament had to have just been brutally boring to watch. But I was just sitting there watching, and thinking to myself that this is so interesting because nobody's out of it. I mean, there's obviously big fish in the Sabine. So like that last day, I mean, it seemed like Jason Christie was running away with it the whole time. But the reality of it was there was almost the entire top 10 was one bite away from winning the tournament, which is just crazy.
And that's what everybody always wants. You want to have a tournament where any guy in the top 10 could catch one above average fish and be right there with a shot to win. And
Exactly.
We thought that, we thought some of those guys who had 8 hours to fish right there in orange would maximize their time. Hey, and to be honest, I'm very surprised that Brock Mosley came back successfully 3 times from Houston, and then Jason Christie made it back 4 times from way up north successfully with no other issues, no running out of gas, no cutting it close and being late or hitting something on the way or whatever it is. Weather is a big factor, and we saw that unfold. The guys who were fishing in Cow Bayou and the Natchez River, they had that 30 to 40-minute run for the most part, and even Taylor's down there. And then we saw the 1.5 to 2+ hour run for those guys that went really far away. That's a lot of time to give up. And Kyle, I'll armchair quarterback with you, but I don't really like making that long of a run. I don't know if that's my MO. I feel like I like to stay a little closer at times. And if I do go farther away, I like a couple spots on my way back that if I want to get back a little bit or it's not working, I work a little closer to the ramp, and then I always have an area near the ramp that I feel confident in. But to go and put your eggs in a basket 120 miles away, that's just hard to conceive.
I'll say this much. I was thinking about it actually this morning is if I was in that situation, for me in practice, there's a good chance I would have never even gave myself the opportunity to think that's what I was going to do. I would have just maximized my time, close, really just tried to find something maybe a little bit different. I mean, obviously fishing around crowds is just kind of something not just you have to do, but you typically do at the Sabine River. But yeah, it's just, I'm kind of the same way. It'd be hard for me to be able to do that because just the thought of something going wrong is enough to drive me to not want to make those runs. But kudos to those guys. I mean, honestly, like you said, for that to be as successful as it was, I mean, that's clearly what set, obviously Jason Christie and Brock Mosley apart for at least 3 days.
Well, and that's the thing. I'm sitting here thinking, and I say that I would fish more conservatively or get in those areas and whatnot. But then I also do some crazy stuff running up some creeks and stuff, places I should not put my bass boat, and I do. So I don't know. I'm talking myself out of it right now. I'm kind of like Brock Mosley. Do I make the run or do I not? And you end up talking yourself into it or out of it. But I do think that I would have really had a fun event there at the Sabine if I was an angler, because the way I like to approach events, I like to look at them on Google Earth, even a regular Lake Ouachita or Lake Hamilton, places that you really can't run up and get too far off the map because it's so residential or built up, or it's a standard lake that's kind of trapped in. With bayous and other places that can flood, backwater ponds, you can find some gems on Google Earth, and you can find some dead water on Google Earth as well, and explore places that don't have bass. So I normally use Google Earth heavily in my map study, and so I feel like I would have been at home looking for areas, on the Sabine River. But enough of my armchair quarterbacking, because to be honest, that's why I'm a commentator, and that's why I do not fish professionally is because I have not made it to the top level. But Kyle, when it comes to fantasy fishing, it was dire straits. We've seen this 2 events in a row now. I love him. He may watch this. He may not. He may not care. But Greg Hackney is one of the best anglers in the Elite Series. But I feel like we need to broach the subject. Yes, this season is made for him. It's a great shallow water season for Greg Hackney to do very well. But man, we're getting to the point where he's 2 for 4, not only on cuts made, but he has been the highest chosen angler in the top bucket every single event this season. And 2 of them, he has not made day 3. And that has opened the door for other guys like you picked Brock Mosley. It's opened the door for Brock. And I feel like now our fans or fantasy fishing players are just picking him off nostalgia. And to be honest, I think they're being a little more disrespectful than they come off as, because they are picking him thinking he is overwhelmingly better than the rest of the elite field, which may not be the case. A lot of these anglers may not be known, but Greg Hackney hasn't came in and set the world on fire on crushing the competition. He's had 2 top 10s and he's had 2 missed cuts. So he's still right there, great AOI position because his missed cuts haven't been bad. But basically what I'm getting at is they thought it was going to be a cakewalk. 7 top 10s for Hackney in a year out of 9 events, and he's going to just dominate. And it's still bass fishing. It's still tough. It's still a crapshoot sometimes. And so that's kind of the best indicator that how the season's gone. He's 2 for 4 on cuts and 2 top 10s in there. It's kind of been dire straits.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, the easy thing to do is you look at an event, and especially the way this season lines up more than really most seasons, you look at it and you say, you know, who's going to do well in this tournament? Greg Hackney is such a versatile angler, and he's proven himself. And I actually watched a video today where he talked about, somebody had mentioned like, oh, this tournament really sets up well for you. And his response was, I feel like they all set up well for me. Like he's been doing this for so long. He's been so successful at it. Like, where does Greg Hackney feel like he's not, comfortable? Like, probably nowhere. So, I mean, it's an easy thing to do is to pick Greg Hackney. But like you said, I mean, the reality of it is every time I look at the fantasy fishing percentages, I'm just blown away by how underpicked and undervalued some of these guys are being. Hence the reason, like you said, I was, huge on Brock Mosley in this event, just the amount of, momentum that he'd had leading up to the event, a place that he'd done well, and was only picked at the time at like 4% or so, which, like I said, is just crazy.
I am 100% shocked that Jason Christie is only 8% on fantasy fishing for Lake Fork coming up, because we have that recency bias. If someone wins an event or does well, they're on a streak, they're going to win the next one, when that might not be the case. And so 8% shallow Lake Fork, I'm surprised he's at 8%. But looking at the Sabine and whatnot, I mentioned Hackney. I don't want this to get off on a tangent on Greg Hackney, because I love Greg. I think he's a fantastic angler.
How dare you guys pick Greg Hackney?
I'm picking on Greg Hackney. No, but Such, I know what that's like. If Such picks on Greg Hackney and messes with him, he's going to get obliterated. So I don't want that, because I'm just the fantasy guy over here.
But the fantasy man is what he called you.
I think
the fantasy man.
It needs to be said. I think that there are a lot of great picks in these buckets, but you tend to go with someone that you just know a little bit more. You just feel a little more comfortable with him, instead of exploring and risking it or taking a gamble, or just, to be honest, learning about these new anglers. There are a lot of really skilled anglers that are just 1% every single week. And so for the Sabine, we don't normally pick high percentage guys. We normally stay away from the percentages when it comes to that. Like, I always try to choose somebody less than 6%, because 6 is probably a relatively solid number, but it's not overly picked. And it really depends on the bucket. I had 2 anglers at the Sabine, 13% and 19%, but everyone else was under 4.5%. And so I think that there's a balance there. And if you're just tuning in and want to know, well, why do they keep talking about the percentages? What does it matter? If they're a good angler, they're a good angler. But the strategy of fantasy fishing, and Kyle, you could touch on this a little bit as well, but when you pick an angler that, let's just say it's their home body of water and they're picked by 50% of people, and you pick someone who's picked by 5 people, when they match up, if my guy at 5% beats the home favorite by 5 spots, you just beat half of the fantasy fishing world by however many points that is. And that is huge. I dropped each day of the event because of guys catching the big bass of the day and getting bonus points, and they were so low picked that they jumped ahead of my guy in that bucket as being the best pick. So honestly, percentages are very important. I think one of my best picks has to be Matt Herron at Sabine. He was 0.25%. 0.25% got 39th in bucket A. Yes, there were guys who got higher in bucket A. Your pick, Brock Mosley, did. He got second. You can't, and he had the biggest bag of the tournament. You cannot understate how important that was picking that guy. But you just have to go and think about the techniques at the lake, who's in the bucket, and if their style fits up with it. And the percentages don't always indicate if they're a favorite or not. They could be underrated and still be a favorite.
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that you and I have talked about for years now. But it's not to say you should never pick the high percentage guys, and that's what I've told other people as well. Is there's ultimately no huge problem with picking a high percentage guy, but yeah, the reality of it is, if you look at especially like a bucket A, where you've got a big list of guys who are more than capable of catching them. Either they're, guys we're used to seeing in bucket A, they're just on a hot streak. I mean, they're at this point in the year, this is something you've touched on. I mean, these guys have built up some momentum. I mean, it's not like they just had one good event or two good events. Like, to be in bucket A, you've had to string together a handful of good events. So the reality of it is, if somebody's picked at 47%, there's a really good chance. I mean, I'll take those odds every day that somebody else in bucket A is going to finish higher than that person. And sometimes it's just so overwhelming that person, the high percentage person, is just the favorite, that yeah, you pick him here and there. But I mean, like you said, there's just a lot of opportunity to make up ground in fantasy fishing by choosing some of the underdogs. Now, I'm not saying, go out of your way to pick somebody at 0.1% every single time.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think that strategy is something that can play in, and I think that a lot of people don't really think about.
I think you see a lot of more bucket C, bucket D, and bucket E anglers jump into the top 10 or top 20 early in the season, because they can have one bad event and drop to a terrible bucket, and then they can reveal how they're actually going to fish this year. Whereas now that we're 4 events into the season, going into our 5th elite events this next week, it's more, hey, if you're bucket A, B, and C, you've probably strung together at least 2 or 3 of the 4 events very well. If you're bucket A, you've probably strung 4 events together, or your three good ones were great ones. Like Brock Mosley, 80, I think he had, or no, that was Caleb Summerall. Caleb Summerall's 80 something at the St. John's, and then 3 top 20s the next couple events. So it's really that balance. And the perfect fantasy team was not selected at Bean. And before we talk about that, I kind of got off the topic. We were talking about fishing, and then I jumped into fantasy fishing. But the Sabine River, I love those events. I love those really low weight events because they're so unique. They don't happen that often. We always try to go to great lakes at great times of the year, weight wise, and they normally yield themselves 70, 80, 90-pound events. But just like we had the St. John's last year, that was only 3 days, and it was tough, and it was 15 pounds a day. Or we have a Winyah Bay. I love those events because every single fish matters. And if you catch a 4-pounder, it is like having 6 or 7 fish to your limit. And so I wanted to touch on this. 43 pounds, 15 ounces was the winning weight. And that is the second lowest 4-day total. And I say 4-day because there have been some 40s and 50-pound weights for 3-day events. Weather canceled a day out of those, like we had the St. John's last year. We had Wheeler a couple years ago. We had Dardanelle back in the 2009, 2010 range. But 43.15 for Christie was the second lowest winning weight of any Elite Series event ever. And the lowest weight came back in 2009, I believe, or 2008 at the Mississippi River out of Fort Madison, Iowa. Kevin Short won with 43.3. So, and the gap had been kind of distant. 43.3 was the lowest, and 47.14 was the second lowest at the Delaware River back in 2044 Hike Week. So you've got a 4 pound and change gap between the lowest and the second lowest. And now it's only 12 ounces or so from the lowest to the second lowest. So I love a grinder mixed in there. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I mentioned it day one on the event on live. I said, hey, we've had 3 events here at the Sabine. They're all 3 in the bottom 7 for the lowest weights in history of bass events. Take that as a positive, take that as a negative, however you want, but that's just the fact that it is. And then I forgot about it because Mosley had 1510. After 2 days, Hackney had like 29 pounds. I was like, they're going to blow past 43, no problem. And then it just went all kinds of crazy day 3 and 4.
Yeah, the 2 guys that really distance themselves on days 1 and 2. Obviously, those bites just really took a huge yield. Obviously, it was tough for Brock Mosley the 3rd day when he ran over to Houston. Jason Christie's area, of course, was more or less blown out, as we saw. So I mean, that made it really tough for him. So yeah, it was like you took 2 guys that looked like they were going to shatter that the previous weight, and it got brutally tough on those guys. So I mean, that's once again, kind of like we touched on earlier, that kind of opened the door for the guys that were more consistent each day. Maybe that didn't have the 15 pounds, but had the 8 to 11 pounds a day or 12 pounds a day. And I don't know, that last day I really truly thought somebody was gonna take the opportunity and run with it. And now looking at it, hindsight's 2020, but I mean, even a Brock Mosley that last day, if he catches a big one on a frog late in the day, he wins pretty handily. I mean, not even, not like handily, but like for the Sabine River, he could win by 2-3 pounds. And it was one bite away.
Yeah,
no doubt.
You call a 1 1/4 for a 2 1/4. You just gained 7 points, and for full field days and whatnot. But it's so eerie how they had basically 4 exact days of fishing for the 2 lead guys. Christie had 15-1 when Mosley had 15-10, and then on day 2, Mosley had 12 3/4, and Christie had 13 3/4 or something like that. And then day 3, they both struggled, and I think they had like 6 pounds apiece. And then the final day, Christie had 8 pounds 4 ounces, and Mosley had 7-13. So they had 4 very similar days, and it ended up being a 1 pound 6 ounce win for Christie, which is pretty tight, to be honest. No matter how tight our Elite Series events are, very rarely is it 1.5 pounds from the leader to second. Normally it's 2, 2.5, 3 pounds, because they end up catching one late in the day that just kind of makes them scoot away, or they have a really giant one that is underestimated on Bass Track. So it was a tight battle. And with that being a tight battle, I thought maybe the weight was going to go down for the cut on day 2, and it went up. It was 7-2 on day 1 for 49th place, and ended up going to 14-10. So not only did it double, it went up 6 ounces after you doubled it. So I was very impressed with that. And the limits, 75% of the field roughly caught a limit every day of competition. And we saw that 6-pounder win big bass like it does every time here. If you catch one that's 6+ pounds, you most likely can take that to the bank, that you're going to win big bass and take that check home and get those bonus points for fantasy fishing. Now, calling the shot on who's going to do it, very difficult. Mark Frazier, never been to the Sabine River, and comes away with a 6.6 big bass. So what are your thoughts on some of those low weights and the cuts, and just how every ounce counted? I think our boy, Jake Whitaker, told me on day 3 when he started the morning, he said, I'm 32nd, and I'm only 10 ounces ahead of 49th. So there were 17 anglers within 10 ounces going into day 3's cut. Incredible.
That is nuts. And this was my exact thoughts watching the final day. And it's hard to get everybody to view it like this, but I know you'll know what I mean when I say this, because you obviously sit there and watch every single second of live intently. But that last day just had such a weird feel to it. It just felt like, even though Christie wasn't just crushing them, it just felt like he was just kind of taking it away. And it was just such an odd feeling to me, because that was the vibe. That's kind of the way everybody was talking. But I'm just sitting here thinking, like we talked about, I mean, Brock Mosley's 1 fish away from having the lead easily, and not even a big one. I mean, just a good, like you said, 2.5, 2-pounder. and literally could have, taken the lead. And that's a crazy thought. And, I really thought it was going to happen. And let's be honest, if you would have told Jason Christie like how that day was going to go, I bet he probably would have figured somebody would have caught him, because it's just the way it works a lot of times. And it was just had me on the edge of my seat. I mean, that's like you said, it adds an entertainment value that you can't get really from one of those tournaments where Patrick Walters catches 100 and some odd pounds, and the next guy closest to him is, I mean, I don't even know what yeah, I mean, it wasn't even close. Like that's the thing that I love the most about the Sabine River. I mean, and then like you said, you factor in the fact, or the the fact that these guys are making huge runs. There's so much strategy to it. I mean, I was kind of thinking about it in my head, and I hate to dog on one of your lakes, but if you take like a Lake Norman tournament, or like a tournament where there's smaller fish, like smaller weights overall, it's entertaining in its own right, but like a lot of the guys are doing the same things. Like there's not like a huge storyline to follow, as where like the top 10, like if you just looked at the map, I mean, like obviously Mosley, the last day didn't run, but I mean, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles separating these guys where they're fishing. I mean, it seems like they're not even fishing the same fisheries. So I mean, like I said, it just added an entertainment factor that you can't get from a lot of tournaments, which is a big reason why I love it.
Yeah, and I think that final day, touching on that, everyone had a shot, but it didn't seem like anyone really threatened Christie. When everyone kind of had a slow morning that morning, I immediately texted you and said, if I'm Brock Mosley and I'm still within a pound of the lead, like he had a terrible day over there, but the water was high. It was different in Houston. And he said, I'm not going back. If you're within a pound, his day was terrible too. Christie's was. So my thought was that Brock wanted to stay close, maximize his time, because he thought his area was going to die out. And he figured, hey, if I had 8 hours, I could probably catch a little bit more than Christie does, because his area's probably dried up. But man, it's so hard to guarantee you're going to get a 8, 9, 10-pound bag there in orange and be able to, that's what you need. But I feel like you can go catch 10 over in Houston so much easier, and you'll do it much quicker. You'll know. And so that's hindsight, who knows? But I immediately thought that was like, it wasn't like he dropped back and he was just, hey, oh, well, I'm going to just save some money and I'll go all the way over there. But I was shocked with that. And it also hurts that the second place was only a pound behind, and third was about 3 pounds behind, and fourth was 4 pounds, and then fifth was, it kept going forever. It was like a pound per spot. And so, and then it got from, I think it was 5 pounds, 1 ounce was first to fifth. And then from fifth to 10th was 1.5 pounds. So everyone was basically an entire Sabine River limit behind Jason Christie. 1 day's worth of limits behind Jason Christie. And we saw that on the final day. We had, I'm pulling up my phone right here. We had a 613 limit, 7-7, 713, 7-7, 8-11, 7-12, and 7-13 for all the nearest pursuers. And the only guys who caught good bags were Taku Ito and Drew Cook. They had 10-14 and 11-1. But they came from 6th and 10th, trying to come back from 5 pounds down, 6 pounds down, and past Christie. And they had good weight, but they just came up short. Their day 1, 2, and 3 hurt them overall. And so for Mosley to have that shot, I felt like he had to do it. And the reason I say that is every single time we've had the Sabine and someone's gone to Houston, weather has hurt them. We've either had 2-hour fog delay and they had shorter time over there, or weather and it took them 3 hours to get back. Something affected their game plan. But I feel like nothing affected Mosley's game plan except for that higher water on day 3, which it had receded out going into day 4. So it was going to be normal on day 4. No wind. I totally thought if Mosley needed to get that win, you got to go risk it. You can't play it safe if you want to go past Jason Christie, because he's not going to lay up.
And yeah, and I remember texting you that morning on Championship Sunday asking what the vibe was like, between the people in studio, whether or not he should have ran. And at that moment, neither of us really knew what was going to happen. And that's the reality of it. Tournament fishing, hindsight's always 20/20. If you knew what was going to happen, you'd just do, the right thing, but you never know. So I was kind of the same way though. It seemed like his best shot to win was to go over there. And like I said, I'm not criticizing Brock and whatsoever, because I mean he was able to stay in orange and catch a limit, get some bites and do basically what he thought he could. But yeah, the reality of it is like it seemed like you at least know the quality of fish are over there. I mean, you've caught them 2 of the 3 days. Also, another thing that like you think you'd factor in as well is the fact that if you were going to stay near orange and fish for those fish have been pounded on. I mean, they'd be,
maybe for 30 minutes after day
yeah.
1, 2, or 3 did he come back and fish around there. But otherwise, you're banking your championship Sunday on 30 minutes to an hour of fishing random stuff during the final or during when you're coming to check in. And the last time you'd really fished there was maybe Wednesday of like the final day of practice. It had been so far ago, 4 days ago, last time he was really maybe thinking about orange.
Yeah, it would be interesting to get his thoughts too. I mean, there's a chance that he could view it right this second and still think his best bet. And the reality of it is a lot. That's a feel thing. Obviously, if he just felt like it wasn't right and felt like that wasn't the thing to do, I mean, you can't discredit a guy for doing that at all, like whatsoever, especially a guy like Brock Mosley. But yeah, you look at it now, and it seems like the odds of him being able to scrap up what he needed over there seems higher, just everything considered. I mean, there was 5 guys fishing, in that general orange area on the last day. I mean, it's not like he had the run to himself. And then, in the last little bit, I don't know exactly the area that he ran to, but he definitely fished somewhere else. Got a few bites on the frog and, whatever. But like you said, was basically banking the last day off of instinct, just fishing what's in front of you. And sometimes at the Sabine, that's what you have to do. But when you've basically led or been in second for 3 days in a row in Houston, yeah, definitely. Looking back, it makes it seem like that might have been the thing to do.
Well, and there were 11 bags, excluding Christie and excluding Mosley. There were 11 bags over 10 pounds from the third to 10th that made the final day. So 8 guys totaled up 11 bags over 10 pounds. And between those 2, they had 4. So it's like, what are your odds of catching 10 pounds? What do you think you need to win? Do you think you need 8 pounds to win? Do you think you need 10 pounds to win? If you need 10 pounds to win, the percentage chance and ratio of going over to an area by yourself for 10 pounds is much greater in Houston, but there's a lot more risk. So moving off that topic, hey, you crushed fantasy fishing. Everybody give a round of applause for Kyle Jessie. Crushing the Sabine River and Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, the standard version. That's what we have to call it now. Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, the OG version. And I'm going to just go ahead and give you my place. I only had 957 points. I overestimated the winning weight by 10 pounds. And
it happened.
I put 53 for that one. And then I dropped 1.2%, and I'm at 86.9%. So not too bad. I'm right behind you now because I had passed you after Pickwick, and then you just got to pass me back up after we were tied after 2 events. So congratulations. The floor is yours, Kyle Jessie Fantasy Savant.
So I had 1,206 points. The thing I was most proud of, and this is the first tournament all year, is the fact that all 5 of my picks made the cut. You can feel really confident going into the 3rd day if all your guys are making the cut. I mean, you're at least going to be like in pretty decent shape. I also was high on the tiebreaker. I had 50 pounds and 10 ounces. Definitely a little high on that. But I actually jumped up into the 90s as far as percentage-wise, which I'm home, baby. We're back. I haven't been in the 90s since 2019, I don't think. So,
which shows I am 3.1% away from being in the 90s, and I'm 110 people between you and I. 110 people is only 3% in fantasy fishing. So you've definitely got to you got to do some good work to make up some gap, because I'm still right there in the fantasy pundits list. I'm third out of 6. 957 is not bad, and that's one thing my season so far. I've been 1107, 989, 950, and 957. So my floor isn't too low, but my ceiling could be so much more high. And that's because I had 4 guys make the cut, but no one finished in fantasy fishing, or in the event, no one finished better than, I want to say, 20th. Let me see where Cobb finished. 15th. So Brandon Cobb finished 15th. Clark Winlet 30th. Matt Herron 39th. Drew Benton zeroed on the day 3 and he finished 49th, the last cut spot. And then I had Jay Yellis really handicap my team a little bit. Sorry, Jay, I'm not going to say you're handicapped, but you handicapped my team. He was 95th after day 1. And he moved all the way up to 76th and gained me points. But one fish for 1 pound, 2 ounces, crushing my fantasy team.
Yeah. So do you want me to visit my picks?
Yeah, you can revisit your picks and tell me. I know we got Mosley in second place and bag of the event, so you got 40 additional points there. He was most likely the best angler to choose in fantasy fishing, I believe.
Yeah, so that was something he was 340 points. That is correct. So I was really happy with that pick.
I want to interrupt you real quick. It's 295 for him getting second, 5 for him leading day 1, and 40 for him with the big bag of the tournament.
Biggest bag. Yep. So, yeah, which is crazy because you would think obviously Jason Christie would have the most fantasy points of anybody, but he actually had 305.
15.
I think 15. Yeah, I'm sorry, 315.
3,
so
5 bonus points.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, 300 plus 15.
Correct. What am I talking about? But I was really happy with the Mosley pick. Went with some history. There's Chloe barking for some reason. Went with some history with John Cruz to do well, and he did. Finished the event 28th. I also went with Brandon Cobb. That was a pick we both agreed on. I think that was the place set up super well for him. 15th. So we were both on board on that one. Your boy Jake was going. He finished the event where he started in day 1. After day 1, he moved up on day 2, back down to 41st. So still mid cut. And then Justin Atkins finished in 33rd. So kind of went with that theory of you can't keep him down too much longer, and he came back, made a cut. So good for Justin, and yeah, it worked out pretty well. I'm happy with it. I just don't want to get too overconfident because I gotta say,
hype him up.
Yeah, it's like that all too popular video. I got my swagger back. We're back, baby.
Yeah, I got my swagger back, baby. Talking about where we are in fantasy fishing, in my Beat Ronnie Moore group, I am, which I don't know if you can see that. Let me see. There we go.
667.
667th out of 2,317. So I am just dead nuts, top 25% of that group, but I'm beating 75% there. I've got some hammers in my group, and R. Gray, I wanted to give them a shout out. 3rd overall and 1st in Beat Ronnie Moore. He has had a pretty good season, obviously. And at the Sabine, he picked Brock, Stetson, Watley, Windlet, and Sullivan. So he had a 2nd with the big bass, the best pick, Brock Mosley, 44th, 35th, 30th, and 13th. So great picks by R. Gray, leading the charge there. It takes 4,674 points to be 3rd overall. So that doesn't make me feel too good that I'm at 4,000 points, and they're 600 points ahead of me through 4 events. Oh, I need to get some points back. But we're starting fresh, a clean slate. And it's a clean slate because it's called a brand new fantasy fishing mode. We still have the OG Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. That's not going anywhere. Picking 5 anglers, 1 per bucket based on the way they are performing in the Angler of the Year standings. But the new game, and I'm going to just go drum roll, please, and I'm going to have Kyle Jessie explain it to me since he is the fantasy fishing commissioner of the world. It is called
Yeah.
Mercury Drain the Lake, and why is it different?
So basically, you take
There we go.
the print you had just
Hold
mentioned
on.
with the 5 buckets
We
and
got
you throw it out the window.
we got to start that over. You froze up right when you started, and it was so anticlimactic. Here we go. Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing Commissioner and newly crowned Commissioner of Mercury Drain the Lake, Kyle. How's it different?
So basically, you take your 5 buckets like you have in natural fishing, and you just throw them out the window. So what you've got, and it's a little different this year because obviously we're starting kind of in the middle of the season. But basically, you have the entire field of anglers for the tournament. The first tournament. So you pick 8 anglers. The point system is still the same. The anglers should be based on points, the exact same as they are in fantasy fishing. But you pick 8 anglers per tournament. After you've picked those anglers, each and every one of those anglers, you can't pick them anymore in the rest of the season. So basically, the easiest example to use, and this is something you guys used on live, this is something we've talked about in the office. Best way to put it is, you have to, there's a lot of strategy involved because you don't want to pick somebody for a tournament that you want to save, right? So like the Johnston brothers, this is overstated already, but the Johnson brothers, the Poliniks, the Fighters, all these smallmouth guys, you don't want to burn them necessarily in these earlier tournaments if you can, because those guys are going to factor up north. Kind of the same way, the opposite way. I won't say angler specifically because I don't want to dog on anybody, but there's a lot of guys that are much better at the southern largemouth fisheries, not so good at the northern smallmouth fishing. So those are the kind of guys in the next 2-3 tournaments you're definitely going to want to utilize. And like Ronnie said, the biggest thing, we've seen a lot of questions about this so far is like he said, it's just an add-on to fantasy fishing. It's not necessarily it's not taking over the old style. It's just a new style. The saying always goes, if one is good, 2 is better. So we've got 2 different formats to play now, and we're looking forward to it.
That's good. And I equated it on Bassmaster Live as the NFL Eliminator Challenge, where
Right.
you select a team. It's the New England Patriots. When they had Tom Brady, you always picked them when they played the Jets because that was a for sure win, and you wanted to try to stack a win every week. But once you pick the Patriots, you can't pick them again. So if you don't do it smartly at the end of the year, you're picking the Cleveland Browns, trying to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers to stay undefeated, and you're not going to win that. So now maybe in 2021 you can win that, but not in the past when the Eliminator Challenge happened. So once you pick the 8 anglers, you can't use those 8 anymore, and that also includes the Bassmaster Classic. So it'll be different because there are anglers that aren't in the Elite Series field that are now available to be chosen. And you've also got to think, maybe I want to save so-and-so who's doing well this year for the Classic, but they might not be in the Classic because of last year's qualification. So there's a little bit of strategy to it, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull my board out. If you got your team ready, I'm going to pull my team out. Here's my Drain the Lake team, my 8 spots. I hope the audio is working well. My phone's low on percentage, but we're working on it. Okay, so that sounds much better. Mercury Drain the Lake, my 8 anglers that I'm going to pick this week for Lake Fork that I won't be able to use going forward. Now, I'm not going to worry as much about percentage in this one. The selected percentage, I'm not. There's 8 anglers. You're bound to pick a high percentage guy, but if you want him for that given lake, go ahead and pick him because you're not going to be able to use him again. So there's no point in trying to save him, or I don't want to pick him 4 events in a row in fantasy and look like a homer. So you pick him here and there. This one, you use him when you need him, use him and abuse him, and then you can't touch him again. So for my team, I'm going Lee Livesey. Lake Fork, you got to go with him. There's not another lake on the schedule, no offense, Lee, that I really feel like is compelled to pick him. Neely Henry, Gunnersville, he's not in the Classic at Ray Roberts, St. Lawrence, or Champlain. It's Fork all day, every day for this one. So I'm picking Livesey there. I am picking I just realized I don't have one of the anglers that I might want on here. Actually, I think I'm going to save it. I think this is my team. I've got David Mullins. I think that he is he's had a slump this year, kind of a real tough season after finishing second in AOI. I think he's going to get at some big fish mojo back here. People might save him for Gunnersville, ledge fishing. That may not be the deal. I was there a couple weeks ago, and there is so much eelgrass that it may be tremendously hard to fish normal ledge. Now, it probably only grows on the bars. It doesn't grow out as far, but I think it still is. I think it still is prevalent out there too. So we'll see about that. So I'm going to use Mullins right now, and I'm not going to save him for Champlain, even though he almost won that event last year. I'm going with Jake Whitaker. I'm actually going to pick Jake in this event because I think that the shallow spawning type nature that Fork's going to be at, or if they're not spawning, throwing that popping frog around, I feel like Whitaker could be a good pick. And
Jake throws a frog?
Jake throws a frog sometimes, yes. He doesn't ever catch him on a frog, but he throws a frog. So my fourth pick, I'm going with John Cox. John Cox is on my top side over here. I think this is going to be one that could really factor for him. Now I'm going to pay attention and ensure that he is fishing this event. I believe there's another event at the same time. I'll have to check the schedule. But with John Cox, I'm going to be completely transparent. You can't trust him this season for anything because he may not be fishing your event. You can't take it for granted. He's fishing a bunch of tournaments. So just be on the lookout on social, see where he's headed, where he's going, and we'll try to confirm it closer to the event. But so if I do change my team, it'll only be that spot because I'm not going to keep him on there because I did it in a YouTube video when he's not fishing the event. So there's 4 of my 8. Now I want you to give me a couple.
Okay, so I'll kind of go with the same strategy you've got here. So I also picked Lee Livesey. It's like you said. I think. Say what? Oh yeah, you have to. Yeah, there's no doubt. So it's something that when I was picking my team, I think this is a thought process that should go through everybody's head. Is if you think you're going to pick a guy, pause, think about the rest of the season, and make sure there's not like a shining star on the schedule that you're like, that sets up so well for him. So with that being said, like you said, it's not that you don't want to pick your stars and your guys that you think you're going to catch them, but you got to be thinking ahead. That's what makes this game so interesting. So I did go with Lee Livesey. Like you said, I think you said it, spot on. There's not an event on the schedule that sets up better for him. I'm going to say the same thing for Keith Combs. Now, Keith Combs is tricky in the sense that I had the opportunity to talk to him at the first event of the season about this tournament specifically, and he was very outspoken that he wishes it was later, and that's an obvious thing because when those fish get out off the bank and some of those places where you can catch them cranking, obviously that's where he's gonna be in his comfort zone. Not that he can't fish shallow, but that's what he'd prefer. Let's be honest.
And with the Texas weather this winter being tremendously cold, setting it back a little, the spawn isn't necessarily delayed, but a lot more fish have been held back. And now that God has kind of said it's warm outside, pollen's falling, dogwoods are blooming, it's time to go up shallow. A lot more, I feel like, congregated. Whereas normally in Texas, you got a cold day, you got 2 warm days, you got 2 cold days, you got a warm day, and they're kind of some moving up here and there. I feel like a lot more were like sitting at the gates and you pulled the gate back and they all went up there. And so it might be similar to 2019, but I feel like that offshore deal, if anyone's going to find him, Combs. He was the one I was checking. Sure. I looked at my board and I was like, I don't have Keith Combs. And I was like, there's a reason. I'm going to be sneaky. I'm going to put him later in the season.
And fair enough.
And to be honest, he has not done very well this year. Not done very well, surprisingly.
Which, I think law of average says he's not going to do bad all season. I'd say this would be a great tournament for him to come out of the slump. And I wouldn't even say slump, but like you said, hasn't performed to his standards. But something.
Go ahead.
But something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I could point out 4 or 5 anglers that could do this, and he's definitely one of them. If there's anybody that could find a little sneaky spot where they'd, some of those fish that have just spawned just come to, let's be honest, Keith Combs is that guy. So, I mean, having so much success on Fork, once again, it's just one of those tournaments I feel like you had to use them. And that's just my opinion. Obviously, you didn't feel the same way, so fair enough. With that being said, that's two guys. I got a Stetson Blaylock in there. So for the exact reason. So one, Stetson, you see Benton, Arkansas on his name. A lot of people don't realize how much time he spends on Fork. It's a short trip down I-30 to make it to Fork. And I know in the past, I don't know when he started going to Fork, but let's be honest, he spent a lot of time down there. Used to do guided trips on Fork here and there. Also has had a history of success there. And a lot of these things are fairly well known. Yeah. A lot of these things are well known, but for some, maybe they're not. Stetson Blaylock, I think regardless, I think he would be one of those guys that will be able to factor in two things. One, he's a great spawning fisherman, sight fisherman, fishing for fish on beds. And then two, he's one of those other guys that I was mentioning that I think could have, some sneaky spots where some of those fish pulling off a bed would come to first. It's really, really hard for me to envision him not doing well. And because I said that, he probably won't. But nonetheless,
Kyle, we would have an island out in Bora Bora and we'd be chilling right now.
Yeah, exactly. So those are 3 of my 8 picks. So the fourth one I will give you is, I actually just switched this out while we're on this call. I had Micah Frazier, and I decided I'm going to save him because obviously over the last few years he's become such a good smallmouth fisherman and a good ledge fisherman. I think there's a lot of tournaments coming up that Micah Frazier could be used. With that being said, I switched it for Derek Hudnall. Derek Hudnall had a good finish here in 2019, which by far is the easiest event to compare this to.
Yeah.
There's definitely differences. Obviously, that was the first weekend in May. This will be smack dab in the middle of April. I think they'll fish differently, but at the same point, I think that Derek Hudnall catches them in this tournament. Also a guy that can catch them, on beds really well. Something that I remember talking to him about via Skype in 2019 when he was fishing there is I asked him how this compares to like a Toledo Bend. And we talked off and on about how this lake sets up like that. There's plenty of differences, about 100,000 acres of difference, but or more. But I mean, like the way they fish is very similar. And I think that Derek Hudnall, be a huge factor there. I think, like I said, between spawning fish and fishing shallow in general, I think he's going to have another good event there at Fork.
So let's say our 4 out loud again. I got Lee Livesey, David Mullins, Jake Whitaker, and John Cox are my first 4 that are listed out.
It's Stetson Blaylock, Keith Combs, Lee Livesey, and Derek Hudnall.
Okay. Now moving on to my last 4 for the group. I'm going to put it over here this time. I've actually gone with old Hackney. I have not selected him in actual Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing this year, but I'm picking him for this one. I feel like he has missed the boat just a little bit at the last 2 events. Pickwick was a little crazy weather-wise, and then the Sabine. But I feel like if he's going to just keep that flip in his hand, this is going to be a good event to do it in. My second of my next batch, Hunter Shryock. I think Hunter Shryock's going to be a good pick. He loves sight fishing, loves throwing braid, topwater. I feel like he could be a good one for this one. And honestly, like we said, you got to consider the rest of the season. Hackney's going to catch him other places. You just got to end up not being heartbroken about that. You got to be okay with selecting him now and burning him the rest of the year. I don't have to use him at the Classic. He's not going to be at Ray Roberts. Do you want him at Neely Henry? Maybe Gunnersville, St. Lawrence, Champlain? I don't know, but I think Fork is going to be one. I'm going to go ahead and say it right now. Ronnie's guarantees. Hackney's going to catch a 10-pounder. So I'm going to say that.
I think when he catches that 10-pounder after his last 2 events, he's going to give him the business.
Oh,
that 10-pounder is going to regret biting his hook.
He's going to yell, "Stand down." So I got Hackney and Shryock, and then my last 2, I've got Mark Menendez and Chad Morgenthaler. So when it comes to selecting those guys, there may be a Keith Combs, maybe another Texan, Ray Hanselman, maybe Stetson Blaylock. There's some other guys I kind of volleyballed around there, but I feel like you have to also use some underrated guys a little bit so you don't just burn 8 guys outright. And at the end of the year, the 8 guys you have left, which this isn't the normal season, this is half the year, so you'll probably have about 50 of the 98 left, but you just don't want to run out of guys that you think could do well elsewhere. So I saved a couple. I looked down that list of the bucket and I said Champlain, Neely, Gville, St. Lawrence. As I went by guys, like consider them.
Yep.
And then I was kind of the ones I hadn't said anything about. I picked out 2 guys, and I think Morgan Taylor and I think that Menendez are 2 guys that you wouldn't think about Lake Fork, but I feel like they'll do just fine there with the shallow nature of where the stage the fish will be in.
I like those picks. I like it. And just to hit on what you were talking about, that's why I just love about this game is just the strategy, because and this is not a knock at anybody else, but I feel like there'll be so many people go down this first tournament and just Hackney, Christie, Paul Fighter. I mean, like
all my favorites right now. I'm picking them.
And then, like you said, by the last tournament, you're like, man, I have used up all of my big hitters.
All my don't own spinning rods. What am I going to do?
All your cleanup hitters have already been used. So with that being said, sticking with the same theme that we talked about with Hudnall, I went with Daryl Gleason at Fork. One thing is I couldn't imagine Gleason doesn't have, quite a bit of history on Fork. But that being said, he's definitely the Toledo Bend Hammer. I don't know if does he still guide out there? I mean, I know he has for a long time. I don't know if he's still actively guiding. I know he fishes a lot of tournaments as it is, but I think it'll set up well for him. Now, with that being said, a lot of people, myself included, a lot of times you think of him as being an offshore structure kind of fisherman. Something we saw him do last year in the Opens, where he threatened to kiss Ronnie on the lips if he won. And, somebody that's really good with electronics, obviously fishing Toledo Bend, being so good out there, that's something you have to do. But once again, I think that there's some similarities there. And if you've spent that much time on Toledo Bend, you've obviously fished it a lot in the springtime. I have really nothing to prove this by, but just having talked to him at Palatka and, some of the things he was doing there for bedfish, it just keyed me in that I feel like he's a good bed fisherman. Like I said, nothing to prove that by in terms of like Elite Series success or anything of that nature. I think he'll find something to catch. I really do. Add what you want to add, but
I'm going to decipher this for everybody. Kyle Jessie saw Daryl Gleason post like a 9-pounder. He caught off bed the other week on Instagram. Now he is a bed fishing savant, and Kyle's taking it home to the bank.
That's not it at all. I did see that video. Yeah. There's no doubt. I don't know. I really think
I got Daryl on a list, but not a list here. I got a list later that you wouldn't think about, but I think about it. And that's I probably mess up because I already think highly of myself. I'm gonna just be completely honest. I feel like I know these anglers better than anybody else, our age at least. Maybe a Mark Zona, a Davey Height. But Davey doesn't know as much about anglers as you'd think, or, he was too busy worried about beating them than worried about what they were good at. And so I feel like I know a whole lot about the new guys. And so I can be a little boisterous with some of my picks and then sneak some sneaky ones in there, waiting to save them. I get beat every year in fantasy fishing. So that's okay. I'm not the best at the game. But I still feel like what my input and thought on these anglers are, I think it still rings true. It's just day to day in practice. You just don't know what they find. Maybe they just had a bad week.
And that's what we've talked about every single time we get on this podcast is like what makes this so fun and so great is like you just never know.
The more you know, the less you know, actually.
Yeah. And it's like I've always said this in terms of just fishing in general, and it's not always true. But like it almost seems like the more you know, the less you get rewarded. Like I could, the theory I'm looking at here, and like I said, there's no science behind this, is I could close my eyes and pick 5 fantasy players in normal fantasy fishing, and I might have as good of a chance as if I really studied every single day that person spent on that body of water and fisheries similar. And like you said, just using your your intellect as an angler, like, you know, how things compare and stuff. But yeah, sometimes like knowing that much hurts you, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, we're sitting here thinking it's easy to be, no offense, Kirk Herbstreit. I don't know why I said that. He's not watching this, but Kirk Herbstreit can look at a college football game and say Alabama, Ohio State, who's going to win, and he tells you who's going to win. Then he's correct, and he's so smart. It's two teams matching up against each other. You got 50% odds of getting that right. Our team's footballs are swimming around on a vast fishery where another football team can come in and scoop up the ball. Just imagine that if Kyle Jessie threw a pass to Ronnie Moore and against a specific team, and we got some random player from another team coming in and intercepting the pass, that is professional bass fishing. You've got an angler who could be on the winning fish and get a bad boat draw, and he's sharing the water with someone else. He could not be on anything and randomly catch an 8-pounder and look like he knows what he's doing that given week. There's so many variables. Your angler could be making a 100-mile run. How about Chris Zaldane? Gets beat to the area that Brock Mosley was fishing. He went to Houston, got beat there, and ended up fishing behind the day one leader, and he had 6 pounds and change, and went back there, had 6 pounds and change, and we never talked about him again, except for right now. But he was trying to scoop up a fumble after the defensive lineman already scooped up the fumble. It was already there. There's no more bass there. So there's so many things that you can know exactly what you're talking about in fishing, and the day's weather or a breakdown of equipment or another angler's on their stretch right before them, and they don't catch them. And the best made plans don't work out.
Yeah. And that's what's crazy about this sport. I mean, ultimately they are fishing against each other, but like the reality of it is like they're out there and like their goal remains the same, regardless, like what the other competitors are doing. As where, you know, in basketball or in baseball, for say, you know, I'm a baseball guy, so I'm of course going to reference baseball. If I'm a left-handed hitter and everybody, you know, and the defense shifts for me to be a pull hitter, my strategy might change to hitting it the other way. In bass fishing, your strategy is the same regardless. You have to catch the 5 biggest bass and bring them in. Now, granted, there are circumstances where what other people are doing plays into what you're doing, based on, you know, the fish in the same areas, that kind of thing. But ultimately, like, it's you against the fish for 8 hours or however long your day is. And then at the end of the day, that's when you're stacking results. I mean, it's not like you're like face to face, you know, fishing against somebody. You know, the thing that comes to my mind is like ledge fishing. Sometimes that happens when you're literally within sight of somebody, or in some circumstances in which, you know which one I'm talking about, you're rub rail to rub rail with another boat. but
So,
yeah, I mean,
I used to do it in intramural softball in college. I used to look at that girl out in right field, and I'd be like, you know what? She ain't gonna catch this, so I'm gonna swing late so it goes to right field. I understand that, you know, you can't predict that, and you can't do that in bass fishing. And somebody,
sure.
I've seen it 100 times. Somebody has a good population of fish, they save them and manage them. Something changes the next day, and then they don't get a bite, and they should have just burned it down right there and caught as much as they could have caught while they were biting. So a lot of different factors. I interrupted and you interrupted your picks a little bit. I think you gave me 2, or you said Daryl Gleason. I think we just
We went off one. Daryl Gleason.
Okay.
Yeah, we went off on a tangent there. I completely forgot what we were doing here.
Yeah, exactly. Mercury Drain the Lake.
So
paid programming.
I went with Daryl Gleason. Obviously, that was my second tier of guys. Not that we're ranking them in like tiers, but you know, like the second set.
Yeah.
Second, yeah. So on top of that logic, I went with not the Toledo Bend logic, but I went with Brad Watley. I feel like Brad Watley in this tournament is somebody that
Lake of the Pines.
Say it again. Yeah, exactly. That was my exact thought. And I've fished both Lake of the Pines and Lake Fork in the same way with Toledo Bend. So that's another reason I don't just think that this is the case. Like I've fished these places. So I mean, you know, growing up in Central Arkansas, I've fished all 3 of those places. Fished Fork a bunch, fished, you know, Lake of the Pines a handful of times the last couple of years. Brad Watley sets up perfect for this event, like perfect. And it's one of those guys too. I just have a confidence that this event is going to set up really well for him. Obviously, he's been really consistent, which a lot of people don't realize. But I just look at the rest of the schedule and I'm just like, this event is for Brad Watley. And with that exact same logic, I went with Luke Palmer. So Luke Palmer's had some success on fork in 2019, caught him really good on a frog. It was a lot of fun to watch. A guy like Luke Palmer that can flip, throw a frog, I don't know, a flog like you looking through, yeah. Plugging those fish through mats and vegetation. But like I said, between flipping, throwing a frog, I think Luke Palmer, that's right in his wheelhouse. Somebody that we both selected was Hunter Shryock. And I don't even remember exactly what your logic was because we talked for about 45 minutes there. But yeah, I mean, such a good bed fisherman, ultimately. I mean, he hadn't had a lot of opportunities to show that, in his time in the elites, but I just remember that run he went on in the opens. Yeah. The same year where John Cox won at Chickamauga. I mean, he finished really well at Chickamauga with betting fish. What was there was another event that exact same open schedule where, Harris Chain. Yep. That's right.
In both of those.
Say what?
I covered him in both of those. And then we also got a top 3 at Douglas later in the year, not spawning fish, but he had 3 top 3s in the opens. And I thought he's going to break through at some point.
Yeah, no doubt. And, like I said, I think that sets it up well with his strengths. Obviously, think about the amount of tournaments just in his time in the Elite Series that we've seen him factor punching. I don't know the vegetation set up there right this second, but there's definitely shallow vegetation to flip. 2 things that I think will play, and I think 2 things that he, basically right in his wheelhouse.
That's it.
That's it.
So my 8 to revisit, we got Lee Livesey, David Mullins, Jake Whitaker, and John Cox. And then we've got Greg Hackney, Hunter Shryock, Mark Menendez, and Chad Morgan-Taylor. My only asterisk, if John Cox is even fishing the event, I believe he is. At this point, I think he should. So Lake Fork, who wouldn't want to catch 100 pounds? But I also know points are valuable, and every league has their schedule, and we all fish the same weeks for some reason. So
there's only so many weeks in the year. That's the problem.
I did say one day, I said, John Cox is fishing 314 events this year. Someone said, bro, that's a lot of events. Man, how does he do it? I'm like, bro, there's 52 weeks a year. How did you think that was for real? He'd be fishing a tournament every other day. Not even.
Other organizations are running Tuesday nighters and everything.
We got a Tuesday nighter. We're gonna have a Wednesday morning tournament. We're gonna have a
Wednesday night.
Yeah. So, well, Kyle, I appreciate you joining me on Cast a Podcast and my YouTube channel for the audio and video versions. That's basically wrap up of the Sabine. What a crazy event there. Jason Christie taking home the win. We didn't touch on this. We can at another point. 3 of the 4 elites won in aluminum boats. I don't know what the deal is with that. And I really, they were won in aluminum boats that do things the way they're supposed to. Express getting real shallow, Bill Lowen and Christie shallow, and then a Lund, a deep V, a big old walleye boat out in the middle of the deepest part of Knoxville catching them up. So that's interesting. And I've actually got on my Twitter thread, I have the list of boat brands. Probably going to get in trouble for some reason, but I listed out each top 10 this season, what boat brands were represented and how many. And at the end of the year, we'll see, because this year is kind of wide open. A lot of boat changes. A lot of anglers represent a lot of different brands that aren't normally on the mainstream of professional fishing. So it's opened the door for a lot of people to jump in. And it's been kind of cool to see how it is. We've had every aluminum boat brand represented. We've had every fiberglass brand represented except for one. I'm not going to tell you who that is. You can go look at my lists. I'm not going to call them out. They only have a couple pros, obviously, on the elites. But there it is. Sabine recap. Jason Christie winning. How Kyle destroyed me in fantasy fishing, but I'm going to get him back at fork. And then how Mercury Drain the Lake works. Now, you're probably asking, you didn't give us your Lake Fork picks for Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. And we're going to do that in the next episode of the podcast. And I'm not going to pick the same guys that I picked in Drain the Lake. So don't just assume, oh, here's your 8 guys. He's going to pick 5 of these 8. It's not the case at all. There's going to be some different strategy involved. And we're going to get back in the game, and we're going to catch Kyle. We're going to pass Kyle, and we're going to dominate just like I planned.
I doubt that's going to happen. But with that being said, I'm also the same way as you in the sense that a lot of my fantasy picks are not represented. I think I can say pretty confidently one or two maybe are the same. But aside from that, I mean, it's a lot of different people, and just moving forward to give the folks something to look forward to, and myself. Are we going to start doing the fantasy shows, like combining the two moving forward, Drain the Lake and our raffle picks, and then do a recap, or how do you envision that going moving forward?
I think we probably can do a Rapala fantasy picks and our Mercury Drain the Lake picks at the same time in future ones. But because we just debuted this brand new game mode on Sunday night after the Sabine, I figured why don't we just wrap up the Sabine, talk about it, let some people get involved. We're going to drop a link in the description. If you're still watching this point, there's a link in the description about Mercury Drain the Lake where you can click it, set your lineup. And I'll actually show you real quick on my phone. This is how you find it on this dang website right here, not our website, another website popped up. This is how you find it. So you are on your normal Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing page, and you can see right there, Kyle's got a great story about it, but there's a circle around Drain the Lake. So it's your normal thing. My roster, I could scroll down and I can set my team. And right there, you just click Drain the Lake. You'll see the logo change. New logo, Drain the Lake. And you scroll down, view your roster, and I'm going to show you my team and prove that I did not lie. There's my boys.
Likewise, I'll prove it as well.
If my phone blind can. All the fans, blind them.
Yeah.
Blind them.
Those are our picks.
Those are our picks. Oh, well. I already told them to you. You don't need to see it. If you're watching this point, we love you. We're friends. It's okay. Kyle, appreciate you joining me. We will see you in the next one, and we will get this rolling for Lake Fork very soon.
Absolutely, man. Looking forward to it, and glad to do another one with you.
Tell your wife and your doggo I said what's up.
Will do.
See you, bro.
See you, man.